Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and to some more urban legends. These urban legends are, I guess shrouded in the government, let's say, governmental urban legends. Donut diplomacy. It's said that the then President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, made a visit to Berlin, Germany, at the height of the Cold War and gave a speech in which he wished to express his solidarity with the people of the city, which was at the time split between West and East by the infamous wall. He told the assembled crowd that he felt like an honourable citizen of the city. Ich bin ein Berliner. The story goes that a Berliner was a popular type of German pastry, much like a donut, and that his heartfelt speech was greeted with nervous laughter. The president's supposed gaffer became famous around the world, but in fact he had used the correct language. Although a Berliner is a German pastry, that is not the name generally used in Berlin. Unwanted money. $1 billion are waiting at the Federal Reserve, but nobody wants them. The American government would like US citizens to swap their beloved dollar bill for a dollar coin in order to save money, as metal coins don't wear out like paper bills. So they've been producing millions of freshly minted coins ready for the surge in demand. The problem is that nobody wants them. All these coins, which cost more than 300,000 million to mint, are languishing in a storage at the Federal Reserve because most people would rather use good old banknotes. Operation Northwoods. Sometimes conspiracy theories are more real than you think. Declassified documents from the 1960s have revealed that high-ranking American defense officials developed a plan to shoot down a civilian airliner. The idea was to blame it on Cuba in a so-called false flag attack in order to justify a declaration of war on the communist country and gain US public support. Other plans included blaming Cuba if the 1962 space flight manned by John Glenn happened to crash, by planting evidence of electronic interference from the communists, and mounting covert attacks on other countries and blaming the Cubans, in order to gain the support of other nations for military retaliation. The report got as far as President Kennedy, who didn't waste any time in vetoing it. Army of Apes. Joseph Stalin had some bizarre plans when he was leader of the Soviet Union. He was inspired by the ideas of controversial biologist Ilya Ivanov, who had long claimed that it was possible to mate humans with other animals to create hybrid creatures. Ew! His favourite being a human crossed with an ape. The notion caught Stalin's imagination and he ordered the experiments to start. The plan was to breed an invincible army of human-ape soldiers that would have the strength of a gorilla and the brain of a man, and could be ordered to do anything on the battlefield. Stalin gave Ivanov free rein to travel to Africa for his research, where he captured specimens to take back to Russia for his experiments at the secret laboratory. First, he impregnated female gorillas, chimpanzees, and orangutans with human sperm, and waited for them to conceive. When this failed, he asked for a human volunteer or volunteers to be impregnated with primate sperm, and, incredibly, several loyal Soviet women did offer their services. His cruel experiments failed to yield a human-ape child, and after a few years he suffered the same fate as many of Stalin's favourites. He was arrested and sent to a labour camp, where he quickly died. Many years later, buildings working on the site in the present-day Georgia dug up many bones in a mass grave. They had uncovered the location of Ivanov's secret laboratory. The bones were identified as the remains of unfortunate apes that had been part of his cruel experiments. That's absolutely awful, isn't it? That's not nice at all. The Two-Headed Dog. In 1959, Life magazine ran a shocking story on the latest scientific experiment from the Soviet Union, the quest to create a two-headed dog. The bizarre procedure was part of a long-term research into the transplantation of human organs, something which might seem commonplace now, but that at the time was only in infancy. The man in charge of the operation was Dr. Vladimir Demikov, who wanted to splice the head and forelegs from a small 9-year-old dog called Shavka onto the side of the neck of a larger stray shepherd dog called Palmer. The latter had already received an extra heart at the hands of Demikov. The two unsuspecting dogs were put under anesthetic and shaved. Shavka's body was sliced in half, and the main blood vessels were carefully attached to the vessels in the larger dog's neck. Her head was tied onto Palmer's body and the skin stitched together. The cruel procedure took just 3.5 hours to complete. A witness had reported, not long after the operation, both dogs were happily lapping at a bowl of water. The experiment did not take long because Demikov had had plenty of practice. The two dogs were victims of the 24th experiment to create a two-headed canine, all of which eventually died. Shavka and Palmer succumbed after 4 days, but others had lasted for a month. Worryingly, Demikov told journalists that this was only the start and that he planned to begin experimenting with human subjects. Asked where he would source the raw materials, he replied that Moscow had more than enough dead people to provide the organs that he needed. 8 years later, the first human heart transplant was performed in South Africa by a surgeon who had replicated the dog experiments after seeing a photograph in the newspaper and had visited Demikov's lab for advice. Oh, but that's really sick though, like the first part of that I don't like. I really love animals. I love them so much. I understand what they're getting at in the long run, but I just couldn't. I just couldn't. Hungary versus Goliath. In 1961, a fin whale carcass, more than 20 metres long and weighing almost 70 tonnes, was loaded onto a lorry and driven around the streets of Hungary. The unusual traveller was said to be part of a Cold War intrigue involving nuclear weapons and espionage. The bizarre cargo, called Goliath, and 2 other fin whales caught by Norwegian whalers in the 1950s, toured Europe as an educational attraction, wowing huge crowds who had never seen such a monster up close. They were also intended as a way to promote the whaling industry to post-war Europe. But when Goliath made it beyond the Iron Curtain into Soviet Hungary, the problem started. The whale made such an impression that the tour was mentioned in the Hungarian books and films for years afterwards. Everybody was talking about it, and some thought that the great marine mammal was actually part of the Western plot to undermine the communist system. Why else was this Western capitalist attraction touring the East? The citizens who lived under the Soviet Union regime were bombarded with anti-Western propaganda on a regular basis, and rumours of such plots were rife. The previous decade, the East German authorities had claimed that Western powers had caused a potato shortage by dropping thousands of Colorado potato beetles, a pest that can cause huge damage to crops, from planes flying over the farms. Newspapers reported several incidents in which farmers had seen American planes flying overhead and then discovered an infestation of bugs in their potatoes. The government described the act as a criminal attack by American imperialist warmongers on our people's food supply, and East German children were enlisted to patrol fields and catch potato beetles. When Goliath made its appearances in Hungary, the nuclear arms race was well underway, and citizens lived in fear of attack and invasion. It was claimed that the great weight and outsized dimensions of the bizarre cargo were comparable to those of the large missile carriers developed by the Americans, and that the journey was not to promote whaling, but to test whether the road network could carry the Iron Curtain. Make sure it could handle such loads in preparation for an invasion from the west. The truth behind Goliath's trip may never really be exposed. Flying saucers. Secret files declassified by the United States government have revealed that the US Air Force once began work on a genuine flying saucer. The detailed plans from the 1950s revealed a search for a new aircraft that could take off from remote airfields, travel at supersonic speeds, and fly at high altitude in order to combat Russian bombers. They dreamt of a contraption that looked more like something from outer space, capable of hovering in the air, reaching speeds of more than 3,000 miles per hour, and ascending to 100,000 feet. The saucer was surprisingly small, about 20 feet in diameter, and was powered by 6 jet engines. The official government line is that when the first prototypes were constructed, they barely made it off the ground, so the project was canned and classified. The discovery led aviation experts to wonder what other strange machines the government might have been working on, extraterrestrial or otherwise. And others even went as far as linking the flying saucer prototypes to the famous alien sighting at Roswell the previous decade. It's also worth to note that we're going to talk about animals again. So basically, there's bird bombs first, and it's some secret government files that were released in 2004. But it revealed that in the 1950s, the British Army developed a nuclear bomb that relied on chickens to keep it working. The warhead was designed to be buried underground in European countries considered vulnerable to Soviet invasion and detonated in the event of this actually happening. As many of these places had freezing winters, the scientists worried that the sensitive bomb would malfunction, so they came up with the idea of burying colonies of live poultry with the warhead, as the heat emanating from them would help to keep the unstable device at the correct operating temperature. Incredibly, this wasn't the only bird bomb to have been invented by Western powers. Pigeons are remarkably good at recognizing objects, with one study revealing that they can differentiate between artworks painted by Monet and Picasso. Documents unearthed in the American National Archives exposed a design for a pigeon-guided explosive, giving a new meaning to the term smart bomb. A conventional bomber plane would drop the bomb, and brave pigeons, trained for several weeks at secret facilities with food rewards, would direct the weapon to its target by pecking at controls with their beaks. The bombs had lenses in the nose cone, which would project objects on the ground onto a screen in front of the birds. They were trained to peck when they recognized a target at the screen, directing the trajectory of the explosives. Sadly, it was a one-way flight. But now here comes another that's very interesting. You may have known about the bird bombs, but did you know about the bat bombs? Well, the American government once seriously considered using bats in warfare. Bat bombs were the brainchild of eccentric inventor Lytle S. Adams, an associate of First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, who developed the dastardly idea to repay the Japanese for the 1941 attack on Pearl Harbor. His plan involved fitting individual bats with miniature incendiary bombs and letting them loose over Japan. They would soon destroy entire cities by following their natural instincts to hide under bridges and in the nooks and crannies of buildings, which in Japan was still largely constructed of wood and paper, and therefore particularly vulnerable to fire. Always keen on new ideas in the desperate fight against the Axis powers, and perhaps because of Adam's friendship with the president's wife, the United States Army decided to put the idea to the test, stating their confidence in the plan with the immortal phrase, "This man is not a nut." Thousands of tiny Mexican free-tailed bats were captured in nets and shipped inside refrigerated ice cube trays. The lowest their body temperature so that they would go into hibernation mode for their journey to the front line. Then the bats were fitted with small incendiary bombs, on timers of course, and placed inside bomb casings, which would be dropped from planes, and it was sort of, the bottom would open up mid-flight, and that would allow them to be dropped, escape, and then find somewhere to roost, before exploding into flames, of course, and hopefully bringing down a building with them. The ingenious idea did not work as well as the army had hoped. The exploding bats managed to escape and find a perfect roost inside an American Air Force hangar, destroying the building and several planes. Nevertheless, both the Navy and the Marine Corps preserved with bat bomb testing, spending in the region of 2 million before the race for the atomic bomb meant that the project was mothballed. Adams always maintained that the bats would have been preferable to the horrors wrought by the hydrogen bombs that finally ended the war. Yeah, so bat bombs. Never heard of that one before. I heard the bird bomb one, but I did not know about the bat one. Even though it never technically did it, it wasn't successful. It just damaged their own place, but Old Glory. You probably never even noticed the metal ball on top of the flagpoles flying the Stars and Stripes flag in the United States. So you probably never wondered what was inside it. Each ball, which can be seen atop flagpoles on all official federal and state buildings, contains the same thing, a box of matches and a bullet. The story behind the unusual objects dates back to the early years of the Cold War, when paranoia about communist sympathizers in the States was at its peak. The idea was that if the town, state of country suffered an invasion, the last surviving American soldier would find his way to the flag and perform a sacred duty. The matches were for him to burn the flag so that the enemy couldn't get their hands on it, and the bullet was to shoot himself so they couldn't get their hands on him either, or perhaps out of shame at having destroyed Old Glory. Obviously, now the Cold War has ended, it's extremely unlikely that any such event would occur. But tradition, it's remained. The government won't confirm or deny the story, but many servicemen believe it's true. Some say that the ball, known as a truck in military circles, contains food too, so that the soldier will have enough energy to complete his task. It's also rumoured that the finial at the top of the regimental colours, carried by military flag bearers, contains a similar implements. All this is now merely ceremonial, as flags are no longer carried in such battles. And there you have it. There are some very wild conspiracy theories surrounding the government, I guess. Urban legends, conspiracy theories. Take them how you will. Thank you for listening to this episode, and many blessings.